Erika here with PrepScholar GMAT. In our GMAT Time Management Made Simple video, we talk about varying how much time you spend on a question and how you approach it based on what kind of question it is. Today, we're going to dig into what that means by breaking down the reading comprehension question types on the GMAT. As always, if you like this video, please hit the button to subscribe and feel free to head over to our blog for even more great GMAT content. Links are in the description. So we can break down GMAT reading comprehension into quick and not so quick questions. The quick questions are ones we should be able to answer based on our initial skim of the passage. We often think of them as general questions. The first type of general question is the main idea question. Now, main idea questions take two distinct forms. One is asking about the purpose of the passage. In other words, what is the goal of the passage? What is it trying to do? Is it to argue something, to compare something, to explain something, etc.? These questions often feature language like primary purpose or primarily concerned with in the question stem, as well as very vague language in the correct answer choices. For example, generally accepted position, possible explanation, and puzzling finding could refer to pretty much anything. It's up to us to figure out how they apply to the passage. The other form of main idea questions deal more directly with the topic of the passage. So rather than why is the passage written, these questions ask what the passage is about. Now, these questions are somewhat easier because they're more specific to the passage. They use the language from the text to explicitly state what the passage is about. We can recognize these questions because they use phrases like main point in the question stem and have more precise language in the answer choices. The second type of general question is the logical structure question. Logical structure questions ask about, you guessed it, the structure of the passage. You're required to figure out what role a certain element of the passage plays in the passage as a whole. In other words, what does this part of the passage do? Now, some of these questions are pretty easy to recognize. They ask why the author does something in the passage or why the author includes some passage element. Other logical structure questions borrow language from those purpose questions, but instead apply it to individual paragraphs and sentences, asking what purpose or what role does this passage element serve in the passage as a whole. The final type of general question is the perspective question. Now, these are often called the style and tone question. These questions ask you to find the perspective, or the tone, of someone from the passage. Now, oftentimes this someone is the author of the passage. However, these questions also often ask about people discussed in the passage. These questions can be expressed in a variety of ways, but some common phrasings are asking which answer someone in the passage would agree or disagree with, what someone's attitude or point of view is, or what someone believes. So again, these three types of general questions are meant to be quick. We want to be able to answer them after our initial skim with little to no hunting through the passage. This means that as we do our initial skim, we should focus on trying to figure out the main idea, so both purpose and topic, the logical structure, and the perspective showcased in the passage. Now, luckily for us, these ideas are often most clearly expressed in introduction and conclusion paragraphs, introduction and conclusion sentences, and sentences with obvious transition keywords, which is exactly what we should be focusing on during an initial skim. So if we've done a good job with our skim, when we run into one of these general questions, we should already have a good prediction for what the correct answer will be. On to our not-so-quick questions. Not-so-quick questions fall into two groups. These are specific questions and extrapolation questions. The most common kind of specific question is a supporting idea question, and these are often also called a detail question. Unlike main idea questions, which are dealt with on the passage level, supporting idea questions often focus on single sentences or even pieces of single sentences. With these questions, we'll often get some sort of reference for where to look, like a specific paragraph or a specific sentence or a piece of highlighted text. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes on supporting idea questions, we're completely out of luck and need to hunt through the entire passage to find the answer. However, usually, we can skim the passage for words from the question or use our knowledge of the passage structure to zero in on the part of the passage most related to the question. We'll also notice that these questions use very matter-of-fact language. According to the passage, the author states, etc. This language is critical to recognize as we compare these to extrapolation questions. Extrapolation questions ask us to take what's in the text and then extrapolate it beyond the text. So they ask us to find an answer that isn't actually in the passage. Pretty tricky. Now, the first type of extrapolation question is the inference question. Inference questions ask us to take what's in the text and read just between the lines. What is the passage saying not directly, but that still must be true based on what it is saying directly? You'll note that many of these questions are just about as specific as supporting idea questions. However, we'll notice that they don't use the same matter-of-fact language. Instead, they ask about what the passage infers or suggests, or they refer to underlying assumptions. However, be careful with these. While all inference questions will have inference language, not all questions with inference language are inference questions. Like we saw earlier, perspective questions often use words like suggest and infer. So if you see inference language, don't immediately assume you're going to need to do extra work. We might have already pinned down the answer in our initial skim. The second type of extrapolation questions are application questions. While inference questions ask us to go about a half a step beyond the text, application questions ask us to leap beyond the text to take the information in the passage and apply it to a new situation. These questions can be intimidating because they require a really complete understanding of the passage, like a general question does, then ask us to push past the bounds of the passage. So it's kind of a double whammy. We can identify these questions with words like application, obviously, the concept of strengthening, weakening, or providing support for an argument or conclusion, and the phrase, if true. Now, because specific questions are so, well, specific, and extrapolation questions require us to find answers that aren't in the passage, these questions often take more time and effort to answer than general questions do. This means, 1, that we should save more time for them than we do for general questions, and 2, that we shouldn't be caught up in these ideas when we're skimming the passage initially. We don't know which details we'll be asked to recall or which elements of the passage we'll be expected to apply or make inferences from, so getting too worked up about them early on is a waste of time. Having a good feel for the main idea, structure, and perspectives of the passage from a solid initial skim will help us much more with answering these questions than doing an in-depth analysis up top. And those are the question types that show up on GMAT Reading Comprehension. If you have any questions on what we talked about today or suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching and happy Reading Comprehension studies.